Hi guys, I want to do a follow-up to my meal planning set. Already had a couple questions regarding, different contexts. What about when you're dieting versus not dieting, and even some questions about being more specific, really drilling down into exactly what some of those macronutrient ratios might be for more successful meal planning. So, let me review just real quick how I perceive the priority of meals to be in my diet and clients. Number one, pre and post workout. I think sandwiching the workout with the best anabolic environment possible is obviously a benefit. So I really like to kind of start with that in mind. That's built in whatever my day is like, whether I'm dieting or not dieting. That's always going to be a constant. I'm going to have good nutrition there. So I'll start with that as a premise. Number one, pre-workout. I like to make sure I'm fueling that workout. Even somebody who's on a little bit of a lower carbohydrate intake, any start you have, if I have a client that I have near ketogenic levels of dieting, and you guys know I hate ketogenic dieting, but just on the basis of overall calorie intake, some people need to get close. So let's say we only have 25, 30, 50 grams of starch for the entire day. I'm going to make sure that we've got that pre workout and maybe some post workout, or at least pre workout, and then in what I would call an anchor meal later in the day. So pre workout goes like this: you're either going to be training in the morning or not in the morning, meaning you're either right out of bed and you have to get some kind of a meal, or you've had a meal or two or several meals throughout the day. So one is almost like fasted in terms of how you're going to approach it, at least into that pre workout meal, or as I said, later in the day. So if I'm working out in the morning, and I always had my best results, I hate training in the morning, but for some reason throughout my professional career, I just always ended up looking my best if I ran that pre-contest with morning training. And I think part of it had to do with that nutrition base. Number one, it was easier to get my food in around that workout, and then I could have longer spans of time during the day where I wasn't eating. That helped with body fat loss, and yet testosterone's a little higher in the morning. And like I said, I could always kind of double up on having a good breakfast slash pre-workout meal all in that same context, and it just seemed to work out really well. So anecdotal, but it worked for me. So what I would do when I would wake up knowing I'm going to be training is I want to have the least gut load possible. When you consume a lot of food, your parasympathetic nervous system kind of takes over. So you start shunting blood away from muscle tissue toward your organs for digestion. And that's the last thing you want when you're going into training. So you don't want a huge meal, but you obviously have to prime the pump with glucose, getting some blood amino acid levels elevated as well as blood sugar. And then you're going to stave off, a catabolic environment and just be more anabolic throughout that workout. So I would always use protein powder, obviously the easiest thing to digest, a liquid meal, but I would use something like oatmeal. So it might be a half a cup of oatmeal, or if I'm really dieting aggressively, maybe a quarter or a third of a cup. Scoop of protein powder, and 30 minutes later I could be training and feel great physically. And so that would be, again, just a pre-workout meal with a morning time for training. Later in the day, I have to think again about context. So that's where I might say, well, if I've had lunch and it's been only 1 hour, do I really need any pre-workout food? Probably not. That food is still there being digested, and you can skip that. It's really not necessary, even though a lot of people think there's something sacred about having a pre-workout meal. If you don't need it, you don't need it. You got those nutrients already available. But if it's been 2 or 3 hours, and then I would say you're almost back to where you would be in the morning situation, where you just need some carbs, and maybe that's truly all you need. If you had a really solid protein meal 2 or 3 hours ago, especially whole food, those amino acids are still hitting your bloodstream sometimes for 5 to 6 hours after you've eaten. So that might be a place where, again, for lesser of a gut load, you could do some branched chain amino acids. Studies show that 5 grams of branched chains are just as effective as 20 to 25 grams of protein from something like whey. So there again, you could skip the calories, skip the gut load, and just go with a pre-workout carb snack. And that's where I've kind of, I'm the guy who brought in things like Reese peanut butter cups and Pop Tarts and so forth, because I always wanted something that's a high glycemic index value, to give me what I wanted at that time specifically. I don't eat that stuff all the time, but pre-workout is a really good spot for that. And so that might be the context for you if you've had a solid meal, within the last hour or two prior to that. So that's pre-workout in both of those scenarios. Post-workout depends again, as I believe it was Merv who asked this question, what about dieting versus not dieting? Regardless in either situation, you really want to have some protein post-workout too. And it might be in the form of branched chain amino acids again. If it's going to be an hour until you get home and you can have a solid meal, that's totally going to be fine. All the old theories about nutrient timing and how you have this anabolic window that's only 10 minutes, and if you miss it, you're going to lose all of your muscle tissue and so forth. That's been proven to be pretty antiquated. Some studies show that you've got a couple hours. Some studies show it doesn't matter at all. I still, being a guy who wants to get the most for my effort, am going to put some protein in that post-workout meal. And it's going to be pretty immediate. I mean, I can walk upstairs from my gym and grab another scoop of protein powder, or if it's time for a meal, you don't have to worry about something being too complex. In other words, you don't have to have a shake, a liquid meal. You could have whole food protein and you're going to be fine. I mean, trust me, as soon as it hits your stomach, digestion is occurring, amino acids, glucose are being released, it's detectable. You could do blood draws instantly and see that reaction. So that would be fine as well. So there's your pre and post-workout scenarios. Just keep in mind of what you've already done and what you will be doing. So let me go back to my pre-workout and post-workout in the morning training session. If I had a scoop of protein powder and something like a small amount of oats, and now it's post-workout, let's say it's only 2 hours later because I ate, had a little time to digest, and then trained, now I might want a whole food meal. That's where I could have, and I used to do this. I remember when I would train at my office, I would have 2 pancakes already made up, and I would put like 4 ounces of turkey and just a little bit of maple syrup. So it was like kind of my own little creation of a sandwich, breakfast sandwich. But I was at work, I didn't want to do eggs, it would be more complicated. Now I actually have an egg steamer that I've used at work, so it's just as easy to do egg whites, and I've done the same thing. But because I had a liquid protein meal pre-workout, it always helped to have a solid protein workout, post-workout, solid protein source post-workout. Then I could go another 3 or 4 hours before eating again. So then I transitioned, if you remember the first part of this series, into kind of what I would consider the second priority. First priority being pre and post-workouts. I combine those as one unit. Then it would be what I would call an anchor meal. Where else in the day do I really need my biggest meal? And that's where I'm going to have a good protein source, probably my biggest of the day, a fibrous carb source, so a vegetable or a salad, and a pretty solid serving of starch. So again, even if I'm dieting pretty aggressively, I definitely want to have some starch at some other time of the day. So that's going to, again, keep hunger at bay, and it's going to also just give you that metabolic and anabolic boost, as well as just make, dieting survivable if you're dieting aggressively. So I would typically have that at dinner. I still do. It's kind of the biggest meal of the day. You go home with your family, that kind of thing. It's not essential that you do that, but I do think we all need that one meal per day where you're just getting filled up and you feel okay. Very different than some of the old school mentality of having 6 exact meals every 3 hours, and they're all the exact same ratios and so forth. It doesn't have to be that way. We talked last time a little bit about protein and how studies are showing that too consistent of protein around the clock just simply creates adaptation, like a drug. Your body just gets used to it, and you don't have that same result. So almost having some protein fasting periods, which obviously you've got one at night when you're asleep, but then during the day, if you go 4 or 5 hours or even 6 hours without protein, you're going to be okay. As long as you get protein in about 3 to 4 meals a day when you're training aggressively. If you're not training at all, you're pretty sedentary, it could be twice a day, and you would retain muscle mass with getting a good protein meal twice a day. But outside of that anchor meal and the pre and post workout meal, you really do have a lot of options. Protein only meals where you have maybe just chicken breast and a salad, or obviously that's a fibrous carb, but low amounts of carbs like that are fine, especially when you're dieting. You're kind of getting through from your workout framework into your anchor meal. If you're on a low carbish type diet, then you could do that. Other times you're going to have a little bit of starch. But I wanted to just kind of clean that up a little bit. I know we'll talk a little bit more in detail. I want to still go into maybe in another segment some different strategies, and I'll include maybe a ketogenic style with that. So we'll do that next time, and thanks again for watching, guys.